So, wow, fascinating presentations so far. And I think what I'm hearing is there's a fair amount of similarity and overlap between some of the challenges that young people are experiencing when they're in international schools, with the challenges that children and young people experience when they come from armed forces families. But there are also, I think, huge differences that maybe means there are different things that we need to consider in terms of what that research project would look like and what it would potentially be asking. So a wee bit about myself, first of all. My background is as a speech and language therapist, so I come from working with a wide range of children with communication difficulties who, in many instances, couldn't actually communicate verbally. And prior to taking on the CEO role with Forces Children Scotland, I worked for 10 years with Barnardo's, and I was leading across the UK on their mental health and wellbeing strategy. So lots in this work that Laura's doing that is of huge interest to me. So I'm going to go through a presentation here. I'm also going to add some bits as I do that from some of what I've heard already. And I suppose the first thing that I think is really important is to note that armed forces children and young people are not a homogenous group themselves. So we lump them together and call them armed forces children and young people. But in actual fact, we're talking about children and young people from 3 different services, the Navy, the RAF and the Army. And their experiences can be very different depending on which aspect of the military they're in, depending on the roles that their parent or parents are playing in that particular service, depending on whether there's 1 or 2 parents serving, etc. So a young person whose dad is in the army, for instance, may have multiple moves every 2 years. They may well have lots of house moves, school moves that were at very short notice with no say over where they went. And that in comparison to a young person whose parents are in the RAF, where they may have, or the Navy, where they may have been stationed somewhere for a very long period of time. The experiences that they have in terms of separation and parents being on deployment can be very different. So again, you can have children and young people whose parents are deployed into war zones where there is a huge amount of stress and worry, and we saw that very recently with our families where parents were deployed to Afghanistan, and all of the news that people were seeing, the children and young people were watching, knowing that their dad had just been sent back. And that in comparison to some young people whose parents are undertaking far less worrying for them activities. So it's not a homogenous group, and our young people will articulate how their experience is very, very differently. So we bit first of all about what we do as an organisation. We are striving to make Scotland a place where all armed forces children and young people can thrive and can achieve to the best of their ability. We know that there are many things around service life that can impact on children's outcomes. Much of that is related to disruption in their education, disruption in school systems. They are often not from families where attending private schools, so they're at the mercy of wherever they've landed, whether that is you're in a year above, below, you're out of sync with a lot of the learning. Many of the families do not have access to tutors or additional support for the children and young people, so it can have a really detrimental impact on their educational path. But more so, the young people tell us that actually being part of a service family impacts on their mental health and well-being, and that in turn impacts on their ability to concentrate and pay attention. I've got a really nice film that actually our young people produced for our conference recently, where they talk very eloquently about the impact, but I didn't have time to embed it into this, as in it's too long for today's presentation. So Yeah, so we do lots of things that are about providing opportunities for young people and trying to mitigate against the challenges that being part of an armed forces family can bring. We cover all of Scotland, but we support children and young people from wherever they are. So they can be from Fijian communities, but if they're currently based in Scotland, we will support them. If they're moving to Cyprus, we will support them, etc. So some link to Scotland, but they don't actually have to be physically based in Scotland. So the challenges our young people tell us about are related quite significantly to separation and to mobility. So a lot of issues around separation in terms of a parent being absent, a parent being missing from their life. So a dad away on deployment for a year is going to miss quite a lot of what's going on for a child. Even if they're just away for weeks at a time and they're weekending, coming back at the weekends, the child is very often saying, you know, there's somebody missing in my life. So a real sense of loss and a real sense of somebody not there. That can also cause quite significant challenges in terms of family functioning. When someone is part-time within a family, the family learn to cope without them. The person then comes back into the family. Whose role is it to empty the dishwasher? Everything is disrupted. So lots there that causes distress for children around separation and around isolation, around feeling that they are the only one who is experiencing that particular set of circumstances. So we do a lot of work around peer support, about bringing groups of children and young people together to help share their experiences and learn and support each other. What's happening within the military at the moment is there is a new policy for accommodation called the Family Accommodation Model. I think that's what it's called, FAM. And it is around, instead of people staying on a military base, people being able to go and purchase their own house wherever. It has pros and cons. One of the advantages is people can choose to stay in a community and put down roots, and therefore the spouse is more able to source employment and stay employed. But one of the disadvantages is that the serving member of the family has a lot of travel to do, but more so, the child is often at a school with no other children from a similar family. So they can be the only child, or, you know, with siblings, the only children in school, and teachers don't understand what their life is like. In comparison to young people where there's 200 or 300 pupils in the school who are from serving families, because that school is near a military base. So a real sense of isolation, and that's a push from the military, and a positive one in many ways, in terms of this new accommodation model, but it can increase the isolation that some children and young people will be experiencing. One of the biggest challenges that young people tell us they face is uncertainty. They don't know when their parents are going to be deployed. So a lot of the work that you talked about, Rebecca, I love that raft analogy, but a lot of that isn't feasible to do with the children and young people we work with, because there isn't notice. They're not moved with planning time. There isn't that time for them to do an appropriate ending and to say farewell for people. They're somewhere one day, and then they're moved with a much shorter notice period, and very often with increased stress and anxiety around housing and around, you know, which school they're going to, what's happening, etc. So not necessarily the time to do any of that planning around the transitions, and also a lot of uncertainty around the deployments. So is my mum being deployed? Is she not being deployed? Where is she being deployed to? Oh, she is being deployed. Oh, no, she's not being deployed. They stood down. Oh, no, she is being deployed. Oh, no, they've gone. So young people going out to school in the morning thinking that the parents are still there, and coming home and discovering that, you know, the serving parent has actually already left and they'll be away for however to a war zone. So a lot of uncertainty that our young people live with, and a lot of low-level constant worry and anxiety and fear about where their parents are and what's happening. And obviously, as children in this process, they very infrequently have any say in what's happening. They don't get to be involved in decisions around which school you want to go to or we're about to move. Transitions are huge for the young people, and certainly some of our young people recently, when they were producing this film, said to us, It doesn't get easier. It actually gets worse with every move that we make. It's not something that you learn to get better at. It's something you learn to dread and think, oh no, there's another move coming. And that they learn not to bother building relationships because what's the point? And that was how one young person worded it. What is the point of getting close to someone? There is absolutely no point, because I'm just going to be leaving again in a year or 3 months, or they will, or I'll go into school one day and they'll be gone. So why bother building relationships with people? So a real issue, I think, about how young people build trust and build relationships and feel safe in relationships, when actually those relationships are constantly being fractured because of the nature of the job. Many of our young people have caring responsibilities, and that can be for the serving parent who has physical or mental health issues themselves. It can be in our veteran families that many of the young people are caring for people who've come out of the military and had to leave because of their own challenges. And interestingly, about the issues with identity and belonging, it is a huge issue for our young people who will say, I belong to the Navy, I belong to the military, but they don't always want to belong because it's not their choice. It's their parents' choice of career. And that can be a very positive identity for them. So please don't think all of this is negative. Many young people will say there are huge opportunities for them in terms of traveling and making friends and the experiences that they do have, but they struggle. And some of our parents will also say, just because we've coped on one occasion with a transition absolutely doesn't mean that we will cope with another deployment or another challenge in our life. So we work quite hard as an organisation about the concept of resilience and not putting the onus on the child to be more resilient. The more you throw at a child, the more they should be more resilient. Well, maybe we need to look at what is around that child and how you support the systems and how you change things so that you're not always expecting a child to cope with more. And many of our young people will say one of the biggest challenges they've got is lack of understanding from others. Of people really just not understanding what their life is like. Yes, you've just said cheerio to your mum in the playground. Now concentrate, please. Yes, your dad's just gone back to Afghanistan, but you've got an exam tomorrow, put your head down and concentrate. And in terms of an understanding of trauma and trauma-informed practice and a dysregulated nervous system, the children may not be in the right place in terms of learning. So lots of accompanying worry, fear, sadness, emotions. And interestingly, not all children are able to talk about these things, so we wouldn't be advocating necessarily for counsellors. I think it's one element of what can help, but many of our children cannot even describe how they feel because they don't have the emotional literacy. And they may not have the family support to talk about these things. And often they can feel a sense of betrayal if what they're saying is, I don't really enjoy the fact that my mum is wherever serving because this is how it's impacted on me. So they don't want to speak out. And what often we see is behaviour. We see the behaviour issues instead of a child who's distressed at what's happening for them. So lots more here around what the children tell us, lots of pressure, they feel sad, they're by themselves, nobody to talk to. We've found that digital solutions are actually really helpful for our children in terms of being able to express themselves. Lots of worry and issues around constantly having to adjust and adjusting once and then having to adjust again and then having to adjust again. So we've got quite a range of things we do. We provide lots of opportunities for the children to be involved. Interestingly, what they ask for, because we co-produce everything with our young people, is they don't ask for digital. Well, we are in the midst of producing a digital mental health and wellbeing platform for them. But what they ask for is family days. What they ask for is fun things and activities and sports and all these things we know are going to improve their mental health and wellbeing and connect them individually with other people. It's about relationships. They don't ask for more things that are online. So we involve our young people in manifestos, in our residentials, in all sorts of creative producing newsletters and games and things that are going to help them articulate how they feel and what it's like, what army life or military life is like for them. We provide lots of financial support, university, young carers, families in crisis, which we've been getting more of recently, lots and lots of family breakdown, particularly with veterans when they're coming out of the military and that transition out. We've all the information about the family breakdown, mental health, physical health, substance misuse problems, etc. And we try and provide financial and other types of support around that. And we have a mental health and wellbeing service that we've set up because our young people have asked us to. Currently, we have the online platform being developed, the content being written by the young people, peer support models being created, and a face-to-face one-to-one group work and peer support service about to launch in January. And we do a lot of influencing work. We try and influence government, try and influence policy and other practitioners around actually what are the challenges, not what adults perceive the challenges to be of children that, you know, very often people think will have lots of opportunities, but actually what is this like being a child or young person in the military family. So participation, our grant giving, we have education programs where we're training lots of teachers and others about what that's like for children and what the cycle of deployment, the emotional cycle of deployment can be like, and how you can support a child or a young person. And we have a member of staff who's seconded into the National Transitions Officer role, who's looking at transitions across countries, who's looking at transitions from England education system to Scotland, and working with all the directors of education to ensure that for the children that is as smooth as it possibly can be. Building more partnerships, because again we need to widen what we're doing. More transition work going way beyond education. Young people tell us that part of the challenge is it's about health. You know, they had a dentist, they move location and they're down to the bottom of a waiting list. CAMS is another issue. You know, children and young people on a waiting list for mental health support, move area, they're down to the bottom of a waiting list again. And more opportunities to celebrate the successes and the good times. So we're just in the process of rebuilding our website, being a one-stop shop for all information related to Armed Forces children and young people that will give families and professionals a place to go, as well as the young people. It will hold our mental health and wellbeing digital platform and our new advisory service, digital advisory service. And we've just been successful with some funding to develop a campaign with a London-based agency over the next couple of years that will help the public better understand what life is like for young people from serving reservist and veteran families. Let me just see if there's anything else I wanted to add to that. I think of real interest, Rebecca, when you were talking there, was about managing change, and part of the challenge that our young people talk about is that change is not within their control, and there are very few elements of it that are within their control. So how are you constantly managing change when it's happening so frequently, so rapidly? It's not always positive, and you don't always have much say in where you're going or for how long or which school you will be going to, etc. So really interested to hear, you know, if you get any suggestions about how you help young people manage change in that context. One other point I wanted to make, Laura, was around the impact of digital and mental health and wellbeing. When I was leading on the work in Barnardo's, I commissioned, I think it was Oxford University, to carry out some research and some scoping for me on the impact of digital and what does the evidence base, and they carried out quite an extensive survey, and that did show a very positive impact for many children and young people. There were slight differences, gender differences at a particular age, with girls being more susceptible around about 13, 14 to negative issues around mental health and wellbeing online. But it was a pretty extensive piece of work. So if you can't find it, let me know and I will go back to ex-colleagues and source that for you, because it was it was screeds and screeds of information about what the research said, so really might be helpful. And I think that's probably me.